You see a black arrow in a circle. Do you see that in the left menu? Yes. Okay. Right underneath, you see an image of a sticky, a post-it note. Yes. Mm-hmm. A post-it note similar to these ones. Okay. You click on it once, and then you a sticky, a post-it shows up. You can give it any color you want, and then you type in it. So you see the question in yellow at the top. Anna, is there a way that you could share a screen so everybody can see also what we're inputting? Tell me who has a hard time producing a sticky, a post-it, and typing in it, and then saving it. And then you can move it around. There you go. So the question is, what in the yellow, what have you observed about how people experience organizational change? Alex says it depends on whether they have a growth mindset. So it can be everything from embracing to resisting. Alex, would you mind explaining to the group in case people have not heard this term before? What is that growth mindset?
I think it's an ability to be able to respond to change with the idea that this will support something that's positive, like growing. So it's leaning into change as opposed to resisting.
Yes, and more specifically, growth mindset means it's also about either the organizational capabilities or the individual person's capabilities. If you have a growth mindset, you don't think, some people are good in something and I'm not good, for instance. You're thinking, I can learn and we can learn. We can get better. It's a belief in getting better, and that it's about trying and effort and not about being brilliant. I'm simplifying the concept a little bit, but for now, that is what we mean by growth mindset. So that includes indeed organizational change. If I, as an individual, feel that I can lean into change, by which we mean I can be open to organizational change, and I can develop new capabilities as the organization changes, then that makes people more open to change. What else is coming up for you? Uncertainty about what the new organization holds for them. Yes. And how they will fit in. Very good. Yes. That if we are very uncertain about that, we can feel threatened, and we'll talk about that. Yeah. How about a few more stickies there? What are you thinking of? What have you observed in your experience? Anna's putting in something? Good.
Yes, I'm thinking.
Let's see, one or two more stickies. Anna, could you in a moment, when you've saved it, can you move it out of the way? You have to save it first. And I see Shang is saying people might not be very sure about what impacts. Yes. And thus they feel anxious. Absolutely. Yeah, if they're uncertain about whether they will fit in the new organization, then that becomes difficult. And inertia, somebody else is inertia. That's right. So inertia, if you don't know that word, that means basically human beings and organizations have a certain tendency to want to keep doing the same things because it worked for them in the past. So why would I need to change, right? That's what we call inertia. And Anna was saying, I wonder what's the best method to implement change. Well, maybe let's go to some of these methods and approaches. But I think first we need to understand a little bit more. So let me, Anna, if you can stop sharing, then I will share my slides. Thank you. I hope you found that a little bit fun to work in the Google Jamboard. It's one way of immediately getting virtual participation from everybody, all the voices. Can you confirm you see my slide, people and organizational change? Yeah, okay. So again, the field of change management, organizational change management, is huge. And so today, and within that, the field of how people respond to change is very large. It's a very big field. So we're only going to touch upon a few things. today. And you can contact me later if you want to see more. So we're going to talk, to give you a quick overview. What is the role of communication in change? Let me just set my stopwatch. Can we create motivation and momentum for change? And I saw that some of your inputs into the, let me just turn on the light here. Some of the inputs on the Google Jamboard were already talking about that. We are looking at people factors. So what is the psychology of change? Why do people respond to organizational change in the way they do? We will touch briefly on why it is important not just to make the organizational change attractive and shiny, if you will, point out the good things about organizational change, but at the same time, we have to remove the friction. What do we mean by that? We have to make it easier for people to embrace change and remove some of the obstacles. And then I will touch very briefly on culture change. Or I don't mean now national culture, I mean organizational culture. Very, very briefly. Okay, so let's go there. Hold on. So the role of communication. So in short, not surprisingly, it's crucial, right? Most senior leaders of NGOs that have led organizational change, they say, I communicated about the change till I was bored to tears about it myself, and it was still insufficient. Because people need to hear the messages around the why and the purpose of the change, how the benefits it will bring, what it consists of, roughly how long it might take to move through the change, and how it will affect them. They need to hear it in multiple channels and in multiple ways. So some people, when they learn from their team leaders or their organizational leaders that the organization is going to go through change, they just want to see the big picture. They want to know, why are we doing this? What is the urgency? Why now, etc. And what is the vision? That's what they need. And if they believe in the vision, they can go with that. Some people are very different. They need to hear all the minutiae. They need to know, how is it going to affect my job, my budget, my status, my roles and responsibilities? Will the capacities and competencies that I have still be relevant? So it's a lot about what will happen when and how will it affect me. Both of these things are important. So you need to communicate in many, many different ways. You need to do it in writing. You need to do it face to face. You need to do it virtually, obviously. You need to have video. You need to have short messages. You need to have long form documents. It has to speak to many different types of people. As I said already, people have different needs, and you need to use multiple channels. Definitely not only email. Definitely not only email. Okay, you need to also be clear and transparent about what you as a team leader or an organization leader, what you know is going to happen, and the many things that you probably don't know yet, because organizational change is often very iterative. You kind of have to partially feel your way as you go as an organization, and you need to be transparent about what you don't know yet, but also say, this is how we are going to find the answers. You need to be clear about whether this organizational change process is going to replace some things, or are we going to do new things, new programmatic, for instance, things that are in addition to what we're already doing. And if you are adding things, you need to be clear about what we will do less of, so that people don't immediately think, oh, this is going to be yet more work. Because for most of us in foundations and in nonprofits, we tend to already be overloaded and understaffed. So what will we let go of in the change process is an important thing that people want to know about. Okay. Now, a short segment about creating motivation and momentum. How do you do that? So, a lot of people think that when you are introducing change and leading organizational change, that you need to have a big vision. And that vision is going to create motivation and momentum. Well, actually, famous organizational change researchers and writers like John Kotter at Harvard University, his framework is now at least 20 years old. It still has some relevance today. It has been critiqued, but there's still some good messages in there. And so John Kotter would say, before we get to a vision, and remember, in the foundation and nonprofit world, we have a lot of kind of charismatic leaders that often have big visions about how the world should change. So they tend to want to go there. But before we get to vision, we need to create a shared sense of urgency. Why now? Why is it so important that we do this now and not in 5 years? If you do not have a broadly and widely shared sense of urgency, your organizational change process is damaged from the beginning. And you need to build your change coalition. What do I mean by that? You need to build a coalition of change champions who are with you on this. And this is not just in the senior leadership team or your board, but this is across the organization. So looking out for middle managers who often are very influential in influencing their team members and how to think about organizational change. And you need to think about those informal leaders in your organization who maybe do not have a lot of positional power, but they carry a lot of weight. They're like the nodes in a network where everybody goes to ask them for advice, or they have all the institutional memory of the organization. So people kind of look up to them, or they have been in the organization for a long time, right? So these informal leaders are just as important for your change coalition. Now, I mentioned earlier about removing friction. Don't just provide fuel. Now, I don't mean fuel literally as in gasoline, for instance. I mean, often when people lead change, they think they need to make the organizational change very attractive, very shiny, a beautiful vision and an image, etc. And the organization is going to be so much stronger and so much have so much more impact. I'm not saying that providing fuel for the vision is not important, but you have to remove friction as well. You need to remove obstacles that stand in the way of people embracing change. So let's go there. What kind of friction points could there be? So somebody mentioned inertia already in the Google Jamboard. And so there's some new research that came out recently. And when I use the word research, I do not mean purely academic research. I mean research that is based on a lot of practitioner experience, both in the private sector and in the nonprofit and foundation world. So humans, as I said before, by nature tend to be engaged in inertia. They tend to want to do things habitually. We've always done it this way, and it worked this way in the past, so we'll just keep doing that. So does your organizational idea represent a radical break from the past or a slight tweak to the status quo? That could be a point of friction, an obstacle. How much effort will it take to go through this change? How difficult will it be to implement it? How difficult is that? A third friction is the emotional part. Do people feel threatened by the change? And that can be quite easy, right? You may think, oh, I won't have a job after this. We have gone through this change, or I will be demoted, or I will have much less budget, or I will not have the team that I've gotten attached to, right? Or this will be a lot more work for me, or require me to do things that I don't feel ready for, that I'm not trained for. So a lot of things can create high emotion in people. And then the fourth source of friction is what some people call reactance. So when people are pushed to accept change, they tend to resist, right? Think about your own lives. If people tell you you must do something, your first response is, I don't want it. Why? Because you feel you're not given a choice. Your sense of autonomy and control is under threat. So paying attention to the source of friction, and if we have time in the Q&A, if you want, we can talk a little bit about what you can do to take away some of these sources of friction, but let me continue for now. So modeling behaviors is really important. I talked already about middle managers, and informal leaders are as important. So if you want to introduce new habits or new behaviors in the organization, then modeling that is really important. So you as leaders, and that can be leaders at all levels in the organization, need to model what you want others to adopt. Why? Because people will be watching what you do, not what you say, but what you do. That is much more powerful. So if people see that organizational leaders talk about, for instance, we want our organization to be more accountable, but they are not modeling being accountable towards their organization, towards their teams, their staff, etc., then people will not believe. What's also important to understand that change processes involve different transitions. And people need to go through what some people call 3 phases before they can embrace the new change. So let's see what that is all about. So when people go through change, they basically first have to go through an ending phase. Then they will go to an in-between phase, which is quite uncomfortable. And then they go to a new beginning phase. So what is that about? Let me just see. I'll get there in a moment. So the ending phase is basically the people need to first come to terms with the fact that what they did before is going to change now, and they need to feel like they can say farewell to that in that phase to what the organization was, and they need to feel honored and respected in what they did, what they contributed to the organization before. If people feel that what they did till that moment in time is now irrelevant, is no longer desired, they feel very disrespected. So you as team leaders and organizational leaders need to honor them. The second phase is the in-between phase. So that is a phase where you are shifting the organization to the new state of being, but you're not entirely there yet. You're in that uncomfortable in-between. Now, that is uncomfortable to a lot of people because you haven't put in new organizational systems or processes entirely yet. But the advantage of that in-between phase is that you can experiment, you can innovate, you can try out new ways of working. So see that also as an advantage to experiment. And then when people have been able, you've allowed them to go through an ending phase, to be in the uncomfortable in between and to acknowledge that, then people can move into a new beginning where they can embrace what is happening. At least some people will be able to embrace them. If you're able to help them through imagery, through sketching, through storytelling, through narratives, give them a picture of the new organization and how it will be better than before in executing on its mission. So in short, those are the 3 transition phases. Something that I would recommend that you watch out for is the psychological contract. What do I mean by that? So when people in nonprofits or foundations, I've often observed this. What are the assumptions in their head that they think will, if I live up to those, I will maintain my job? Often it is in nonprofits and foundations, I have to believe in the mission. I have to be willing to work long hours for not that much income, salary compared to the private sector. And so I need to have passion for the cause and be willing to work long hours for not that much pay. And if I do that, I will maintain my job, because the nonprofit and social sector generally is not as, doesn't tend to so quickly, for instance, let people go from the organization. But if that is the assumption and your organizational change introduces job loss, for instance, if the psychological contract is that I thought I would be able to stay in this organization as long as I have passion for the cause and willing to work long hours for not that much money, then people get extremely upset. So be really careful about how you communicate about the let me call it the long-term tenure, if you will, of jobs. Okay, very quickly, because I want to make sure you have time to ask questions and to give me your responses and talk with each other. So very quickly about organizational culture change. Nonprofits often talk about organizational culture as if it's about values and principles that we want to live by. But actually, it's much more about shared habits and behaviors that are widely shared, that are constantly repeated and reinforced and hopefully modeled. And so there's a whole field of work that consultants like myself and others can help your organization with, that is about how to affect culture change. We don't have time to talk about it today, but it is an incredibly important topic. So let me stop there and let me stop sharing for now and ask you the question, like a first question, maybe in the chat. Let me ask you 3 questions in the chat. And actually, Anna, before we go into quick breakouts, let me ask the group, what is one question that came up for you as I was talking about organizational change? You can put it in the chat, or you can put it, you can speak, of course, on video. And thank you for all having your videos on. So what is one question that's coming up for you? Somebody has to be the first person. Put it in the chat if you feel shy. I see Alex. Let me just check if, just for one moment,
yeah.
If there are others. Well, Alex, why don't you put yours in the chat so we will have it ready? Other please put some questions in the chat. What is coming up for you? What questions do you have? Aha, is there any standard procedure for organizational change? I would say no. Organizational change is so fluid and is so complex and is so partially specific to the organization. There is not one standard procedure. But what I hopefully in this short session did is give you an introduction to some of the core principles of how people respond to change that I see coming up all the time, so that are universal. I hope that that's so it's more about concepts and principles than a standard procedure that we can say is relevant for all organizations. And I see a question, how can an organization cope with culture change brought in by top management? It's a very good question. A lot of top leaders think that they can introduce culture change from the top. There's very little research that bears that out, that says that that is true. I am not saying that you don't, yes, you do need top leadership support. You need some, obviously, top-down communication strategies, but it's not enough. Because if change is pushed from the top, and there is not that broader change coalition that I talked about before. And again, I'm sorry, it's such a short session, so we cannot really go into much detail, but a top-down pushed change almost never works. In fact, there is decades of research that says that a good majority of organizational change processes never succeed, something like 60, 65, 70%. And one of the reasons for that is when top leadership thinks that they can, from the top down, can orchestrate culture change. Culture change, the shared habits and behaviors that we're all socialized in when we enter the organization, is very persistent, is very, culture is very tenacious, it's very stubborn. Okay, so it's not something that top leaders can change over 1 or 2 years. So sometimes I hear nonprofit leaders say, oh, I changed the culture in my organization in a year. You know what I think when that is said? I think that is bullshit. That is just not true. It's not borne out by the practice nor by the research. Looking at Kateri's question, what would you say is the biggest barrier with driving change? Oh my God, Kateri, there are so many barriers to that. So I'll just, I mentioned a number of friction points already. I think you were already with us, right? When we talked about that. So one is, how big is the change? If it feels enormous and I don't know as an individual in an organization, what is the next step? What's the first step? That can be a big barrier, right? Or if it triggers a lot of emotion because I feel threatened. Again, maybe I feel threatened because I'm thinking this is going to mean a lot more work for me or my team, or I'm going to lose budget, or I'm going to lose access to my boss who I was able to influence, right? Let alone, of course, when we're worried about losing status or losing our jobs. There are many barriers like that. It's very hard to give one answer. Do you want to follow up, Kateri? Do you have more questions or comments? What's your experience?
No, thank you. So yeah, my experience has been always related to, I guess, emotional, like an emotional process. Like I love the example that you gave us about having access to your manager, right? Sometimes just feeling that you will not have that access any longer brings a lot of frustration and then a lot of resistance, right? So
yes, exactly, because that means you're losing relative, it's like an asset, right? Your access to your manager. It can be if it's a productive relationship, etc. Let me look at some of the other questions. And please, if people will want to speak up, please join the conversation. It doesn't have to be between you and me individually. Let me see how to better make the process more smooth when people have strong inertia or reluctance in front of new changes. So there are many answers we could give to that, but how did you design the organizational change process? Did you from the beginning allow people input into the shape of the change? Did you, for instance, test and ask people, do they feel that sense of urgency? Do they understand why the leadership thinks that change is really important? Is that a shared sense of urgency, or is it just something that is kind of dropped by the top leadership? So that is one answer to your question. How much involvement was there in the change? Now, you cannot design or execute organizational change process by consensus. You cannot. There have to be certain decisions made at a certain point, but if you did not have input, or if people feel that the change was forced upon them, again, that sense of autonomy, that need for autonomy and control gets harmed, there can be a lot of resistance. It's a very complex field, change management, but I love it because it is ultimately about people and their psychology, and it's about politics as well, by which I mean how power is distributed in the organization, and that makes it so interesting. Let me see, Alex, your question. What's the best way to create accountability when a new organization has formed from a group of autonomous consultants working together who deeply value their autonomy and want to retain that, but also have an inherent allergy and dislike of hierarchy? Alex, that's a very specific question. Would you mind, can you contact me afterwards about that? Because I think it's so specific that I'm not sure. Is that okay? I'm putting my my email in the chat now, and feel free to contact me, and then maybe we can have a one-on-one, a short session about that. Okay, let me take one more or two more questions, and let's see if we still have time for a quick breakout group, unless Anna, if you think it's better to stay in virtual, in plenary. Let me see. Even communication clarification have been carried out a lot.
Sorry, Tosca, it's part of the addition to my previous question, so you have already answered my question. Thanks.
Oh, have I done that, or is this a
Yeah,
follow-up?
already. Yeah, that's
Okay.
addition to my previous question.
Oh,
yeah.
got it. It came
You're
in.
good. Thanks.
Oh, got it. Now I see it. Yes. Okay. And I see another question: how to comment on an organizational? How to evaluate? Woo, that's a hard question. So evaluate organizational change. If you've been clear as an organization upfront, what were your motives and your objectives for the change, and how you will measure whether you, for instance, is that we want to have more, for instance, we want to have more impact as a nonprofit or foundation, or we want to raise more money or from a more diverse set of sources, for instance, right? Or we want to increase our legitimacy. If you have set that out up front, that can be measured. And it can be measured by an external evaluation, by an internal assessment in a participatory way. You can use staff engagement surveys or pulse surveys. Those are micro surveys where you ask just 2 or 3 questions every 3 months, for instance, about how staff are experiencing the change and whether they feel we're moving towards the objectives that we set for it. So there are multiple ways to do this. At one point, I was asked with my small team when I was still at Syracuse University to do an external assessment of a very big organizational change process with a couple of big INGOs, so Oxfam, CARE, and 1 or 2 other organizations, Save the Children. So that was external evaluation. That's one way of doing it, but definitely not the only way. I think Rebecca has a question, Anna, but I'll leave it up for you to answer that.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. What do you think, Anna? Should we stay in plenary, or should we do a quick 1 to all? Sorry.
Well, it's not a bad idea to stay in plenary as long as the questions keep on coming and we keep on discussing them.
Okay. Why don't I ask the group? I'm going to put 3 questions in the chat now, and I'd like everybody get your fingers on the keyboard and get ready to answer. So the first question is what, and then so what, and now what? And I will explain. So I put it just in the chat. So what is my question to you is, what observations stood out for you from the presentation and from our discussion so far? The second question is, so what? Why is that observation important for you? Okay, there's your second question. And the last question is, now what? What action now makes sense? Okay, there you have it. What? So what? Now what? Can I get everybody to respond to that? Based on what you've heard us talk about, what's important here? And then we can have another discussion and discuss more of your questions. And Rebecca, very welcome. Sorry that you missed the presentation, but you will get the slides. And Rebecca, just for you, if you want to still, even though you missed the content, just a question of when you think about organizational change process, what matters to you? Why did you come to the session? What brought you to this session? I'd love to see that in the chat as well. And I see some people are saying, Alex is saying, observation, the need to address organizational change early. Alex, when you say that, what do you mean by addressing it early?
I think you you talked about when people are, when there's resistance or fear, just, yeah, talking about it early. In the
Okay,
piece.
so you're saying it's important to address that early. And in fact, it's yes, and fairly openly. And let me give you one more concept. This is the concept of positive resistors and negative resistors to change. It's not my concept. I borrowed it from a colleague, Barney Talek, who I meet, who I work with regularly on change management. So positive resistors are people who are actually agreeing with the direction of change, the direction of travel, if you will, the direction of change, but they disagree with how the leadership goes about it. So the how they go about it. Negative resistors are people who just think the direction of change is not a good idea, and they don't agree either with how the organization goes about it. A lot of change managers tend to mix up the two, but it's important to distinguish that, because the positive resistors, it's well worth your time to try to get them on your side about the how we will get there. So just one more concept. All right, what else comes up for you? So what? What? So what? Now what? Are you all typing? I see some busy from your body language. What? Observation, sufficient communication comes before making change. Absolutely. Yes. That is I would call that absolutely necessary. Now, when you consult about organizational change, you need to be really careful about managing expectations. So explain what you mean by consult. If consulting means we will seek input and information and advice, but we are not necessarily bound by what you are going to give us as feedback or input, right? That's a really important distinction, because otherwise you may create expectations that you cannot fulfill. And I see Rebecca says, developing a next strategy, org change in a new and open way, ensure the teams are empowered. I don't know what BAU thinking is, Rebecca. I'd love you to explain.
Business as usual.
Oh, business as usual. Got it. More exponential. But notice when asked, what could we achieve with no constraint? They're still bound by current. Yeah. So in other words, the teams or team are not really able to think outside the current boundaries. Is that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see it's a process to work through. Like, your sort of first step is that, and then it's like, okay, despite constant reminders, like, let's not worry about that yet. But people are still clearly bound by that, because it's like, well, anyway, so I see it's a process you sort of have to work through to. Yeah.
There are creative ways of facilitation where you ask playful or at least creative questions, and also where you facilitate really good silent, first written, like brain writing. So that is a form of initially individual brainstorming, not group brainstorming, in writing, and then you encourage people to get more creative in that way. But anyway, that's a bigger topic, maybe for a separate one-on-one conversation if you want. But yeah, that's a normal constraint. That's a normal human constraint. Yeah. What else is coming up for you? We have 10 more minutes. So use it the way you would, makes it most useful for you. And I see the psychological contract linked with organizational culture, because that explains a lot. I mean, you're not sure. Oh, that's interesting. So the psychological contract appealed to you. Yeah. I find that in the nonprofit sector really quite striking that there is this unspoken belief system, which again is a part of the culture, that if I work hard for not too much money and I'm very passionate about a cause, that will mean I can keep my job. It's a little bit like in the public sector, right? And these days with nonprofits, they have very volatile environments to work in. And some of the traditional nonprofits in the global north, in Western countries, are quite under threat in terms of their funding models. So yeah. So at the very least, I would say try to be really careful not to create expectations that people will have a job for life from here on. Try to at least not repeat that mistake would be one thing, because people are really shocked when that psychological contract is broken and really upset. You get a lot of resistance and anger and grief, right? Because there's grieving in that. Siddharth, what's coming up for you? I'm going to call you in.
Thanks. I was actually just typing and just wanted to build on what was just typed around psychological contract. I feel that this breach of psychological contract often goes beyond just the job security. I think it's also about the what the new nature of relationships would look like, what your role would be. And earlier, probably you had just an implied understanding of where you are in the organization, and going forward, probably you just need something more than just mere reassurance to feel secure enough. So I would love to discuss what should be to provide that.
Okay. Tell us more about your exact interest.
All right, we know that psychological contract is a major challenge, and we see that when we are working with some teams who are trying to change the way they function. But how do the leaders respond to this? How can they be more mindful of this? What are the steps that they can take? You mentioned that top-down changes have a high rate of failure, but the reality is also that it will always, or in most cases, it will be top-down. It's hard to kind of get it bottom up. So how do the leaders ensure that all these challenges do not emerge?
Right. And that's why change management is so complex and so often goes wrong, but because it's so complex and there are so many. So there's the psychology of people, there's the internal power struggles, and there's just so many parts to a change agenda that are all interdependent. And that's why it's so fascinating, but also so complex. I always have a lot of respect for change managers. So Siddharth, I just want to correct one impression that I may inadvertently have created that I don't want you to walk away with. I did not say that top-down driven change, that is necessarily, not that it's bad. You definitely need top supported and probably also top level shaped organizational change. But if it's not also bottom up, and in fact, there are change authors who, I don't know if you've heard the word viral change. So that's the thinking that, yes, you do need top-down support and communication, etc., but it cannot be the only one, because if you do not have bottom-up support, where some people who are already modeling the change, they are becoming, have you heard of the concept of social proofing? So where people who are informally influential in the organization, they may not be in top leadership, but they're influential for a range of reasons. I mentioned some earlier. When they model the change that you want to see more of, some people will want to start to imitate them, because that's a very strong human desire to belong and to imitate and to belong to groups. So viral change talks about how you can energize people throughout the organization to embrace change that then leads to social modeling. So that's just a nuance that I wanted to bring in. Again, it's very hard to talk in such a short time about fairly complex things, but maybe I made the principle somewhat clear. Yeah. Okay. Okay, looking at the time, we only have another minute or so before I
I just want to echo what Sadiq just mentioned. In my understanding, the psychological contract is also more than job security. I feel it's in many aspects, you know, not only whether I can keep this job, but like what is the right thing to do, and how people are evaluated, and whether we're doing certain things in what kind of rule, in what kind of manner, and those kind of things. It is maybe it's part of organizational culture, and it's part of some psychological culture. I don't know if they're. That's why I think they are linked in a way. It's really not everything has to reach the level of job security, but usually are the little things that that's like embedded in the organizational culture, and people believe, and logically in principle, this is the way how things should happen, and this is the way how things should be judged or evaluated. Those are the little things that make it very important, rather than like the ultimate job security.
You're absolutely right. I'm so glad you brought this up, that the psychological contract does not only have to be about job security. For instance, in the public sector, that is a strong, in the government sector, that's a strong part of the psychological psychological contract, but not the only one. And that it's closely linked with organizational culture, because organizational culture is about these shared, again, widely shared habits and behaviors that are based on underlying belief systems and assumptions that if I do this, that's what is right in this organization. That is how I'm supposed to behave, right? This is right and that is wrong. So yes, you're right. It's closely intertwined, and we just don't have time in an hour to talk really to unpack organizational culture, because it's so huge again in its own right. But you're absolutely right. I'm glad you brought that up. So with that, Anna, I'm conscious of the time. So maybe if I can just ask you this question. One practical takeaway for you is, and let me put it in the chat, what is one thing you will do differently as a change manager now after this? Satisfy the different needs, Kateri. Yes. Plan for a longer timeline to implement change. Absolutely. Change, see, that will always last longer than you thought it would last, and also than you want it to last. It takes more effort than you thought it would take. And the benefits, if they show up, tend to come later than you had hoped they would be. So it's a tough thing. It just is a tough thing. Communicate as much as possible before any move. Yes, Alex likes Siddharth's point. Yes, I agree. Design better communications. More bottom-up communication. Yes. Use the power of the change coalition. That is incredibly important, Anna. Thank you. Anna, I better turn it over to you. Thank you, everybody. I will put my email in the chat again if you want to reach out for some a chat between the two of us. And I also wanted to say that we are, my small team and I are also offering a course. This is on virtual team management, virtual team leadership. And you see it here. You see here, we have a free mini course for you to sample. And if this is important to you, virtual team management and hybrid team management, this is the school that my team and I maintain, where we offer also a fee-based course on virtual team management that is actually starting next week, Monday, and registration closes on Monday. So if that is of relevance to your teams, then you can check that out. Over to you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tosca. It was really great topic, great presentation. And I think it's something to continue exploring because we've only touched the surface today.
Oh,
also, you gave a lot of
totally.
helpful tips and discussion was very engaging. Thank you everyone for contributing. So, and yes, indeed, we had a session on virtual leadership before. That's also essential topic, particularly nowadays that the world is working more and more virtually. So then on this note, please feel free to get in touch with Tosca. Thank you once again to everybody and to continue discussion during the future seminars and one-to-ones and individual consultations. Thank you, everybody. I'll be in touch further in communicating and sharing the documentation and slides, whatever. Thank you so much. Have a nice
bye, everybody.
Thank you so
Enjoyed
much.
being with you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Tosca. Thank you. Bye, Anna.
Bye. And Anna, good night to you. I hope you'll sleep.
Thank you.